They called his B-25 gunship impossible until it sank 12 Japanese ships in just 3 days. March 1943. Dobodura Airfield, New Guinea. The rain had turned the airfield into a shallow swamp. Water pooled in bomb craters and ran in thin streams across the crushed coral runway. Aircraft engines roared constantly, but the sound was uneven, interrupted by mechanical failures, rushed repairs, and the constant movement of men trying to keep planes flying in an environment that seemed determined to stop them. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer stood beside a parked B-25 Mitchell, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. Mercer was 27 years old, an experienced flight engineer and top turret gunner who had arrived in the Southwest Pacific months earlier. Before the war, he had worked around engines and heavy machinery. He understood weight, balance, and mechanical limits. That knowledge made what he was seeing deeply unsettling. This B-25 was not like the others. The clear glass nose, normally occupied by a bombardier and a bomb sight, was gone. In its place was a solid metal structure, scarred from hurried fabrication. Several .50 caliber machine guns protruded forward, mounted tightly together. Ammunition belts disappeared into the fuselage through open panels that mechanics had not yet bothered to fully seal. Mercer knew the B-25 well. It was designed as a medium bomber, meant to fly at altitude, drop bombs in formation, and rely on defensive guns for protection. It was not designed to attack ships at low level. It was not designed to carry that much weight in the nose. And it was not designed to fire so many guns forward at once. Everything about this aircraft violated the manuals. The reason it existed was simple. The war in the Pacific was going badly. Japanese forces controlled much of New Guinea's coastline. At night and during poor weather, supply ships and barges moved freely along the shore, delivering food, ammunition, and reinforcements to isolated garrisons. High-altitude bombing had failed to stop them. Clouds covered targets. Bombs missed narrow ships. Fighters lacked the range and firepower to do lasting damage. Men on the ground were paying the price. American commanders needed ships sunk quickly, not damaged, not delayed. Sunk. Out of that pressure came a radical decision. Bombardiers were removed. Bomb sites discarded. Engineers installed forward-firing machine guns and instructed crews to attack at extremely low altitude, aiming directly at ships instead of dropping bombs. The idea was to overwhelm Japanese crews before they could react, disabling ships through concentrated fire at close range. Many senior officers opposed the plan. They warned the aircraft would be unstable. They warned recoil could damage the airframe. They warned that flying straight at ships would expose crews to point-blank anti-aircraft fire. Among mechanics and pilots, one word spread quickly: impossible. Captain Robert Hale, the pilot assigned to the aircraft, approached as Mercer continued his inspection. Hale was in his early 30s, a quiet officer who had flown combat missions since the early days of the campaign. He was not known for speeches or confidence displays. He trusted procedures and preparation. "They're still arguing about this thing at headquarters," Hale said, looking at the modified nose. Mercer nodded. They might be right. Hale did not argue. He simply studied the aircraft for a moment longer. Their task was clear. Hale would fly the aircraft at low altitude. Mercer would monitor engines, manage systems, and man the top turret if needed. The rest of the crew would operate the forward guns and side positions. Their mission was not to test a concept. It was to destroy enemy shipping that had resisted every other method. The briefing was brief and direct. Reconnaissance had reported a small Japanese convoy moving along the coast north of Buna, lightly escorted, within range. The weather was poor, but acceptable. There was no mention of glory or experimentation. Only instructions. Fly low. Attack fast. Do not linger. As the engine started, Mercer felt the difference immediately. The aircraft vibrated more than usual. The nose felt heavy. When the throttles advanced for takeoff, the B-25 accelerated slower than expected, tires throwing water and mud behind them. For a moment, Mercer wondered if the critics had been right. Then the aircraft lifted, barely clearing the end of the strip. The jungle passed beneath them at a dangerously close distance. Hale kept the aircraft low, conserving fuel and avoiding detection. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. Each man focused on his task. Mercer watched engine temperatures, oil pressure, and fuel flow, ready to call out any sign of failure. He knew that if something went wrong at this altitude, there would be no recovery. Ahead, the coastline emerged through broken cloud cover. The sea was calm, too calm. Somewhere below and ahead, Japanese ships continued their routine operations, unaware that the rules governing air attacks had already been abandoned. The B-25 descended further, leveling out just above the water. The engines roared at near maximum power. The aircraft committed itself fully to the approach. At that moment, there was no turning back. The experiment had ended. The mission had begun. The descent continued until the aircraft was barely above the surface of the sea. From Mercer's position, the water rushed beneath them in a blur, broken only by the faint white lines of small waves. The B-25 felt different at this altitude. Every adjustment of the controls produced an immediate response. There was no room for delay, no buffer of airspace to correct a mistake. Captain Hale kept his eyes fixed forward. His posture was rigid, deliberate. He had flown low before, but never like this, never with a fully loaded aircraft committed to a straight-line attack. Training manuals offered no guidance here. Everything depended on judgment, timing, and nerve. The coastline slid past on their left. Jumbo pressed close to the shore, thick and dark. Then Mercer saw the first shapes on the water. Ships, 3 of them at first, moving slowly along the coast. Cargo vessels, low in the water, their decks cluttered with crates and equipment. Smoke drifted lazily from their funnels. They were not maneuvering. No zigzag patterns. No visible readiness. They did not expect aircraft at this height. Hale lowered the nose slightly and increased speed. The engines responded with a deeper roar, vibrations running through the fuselage. Mercer checked the gauges again, calling out numbers automatically. Everything was holding, for now. Inside the aircraft, the tension sharpened. The nose gunners leaned forward, hands tight on their triggers. Ammunition belts rattled softly as the aircraft shook. Sweat ran freely despite the airflow. Still no anti-aircraft fire. Mercer realized why. Japanese gunners were trained to scan the sky. High angles, high silhouettes. What approached them now barely rose above the horizon, blending into the glare off the water. At less than 1,000 yards, Hale spoke for the first time since takeoff. Stand by. The first ship grew rapidly in the windscreen. Mercer could now see individual figures on deck. Some turned toward the sound, confused rather than alarmed. Then Hale gave the order. Fire. The aircraft erupted. The forward-firing machine guns unleashed a sustained burst that shook the entire nose. The recoil was violent, far stronger than anything Mercer had felt in testing. The B-25 shuddered but held its line. Rounds tore into the ship's bridge and forward deck. Wood splintered. Metal sparked. Crewmen scattered or fell. Anti-aircraft guns tried to swing downward, but the attack was already upon them. Mercer tracked the ship through the turret as they passed overhead. He fired in short, controlled bursts, watching rounds walk across the deck. Secondary explosions followed. Fuel drums, ammunition, something volatile igniting under sustained fire. The ship slowed almost immediately, smoke pouring upward. Hale did not pull up. He drove straight toward the second vessel. This time, the Japanese reacted. Tracer fire rose suddenly, streaking past the cockpit and snapping by the fuselage. The sound was sharp and close. A round punched through the side of the aircraft behind Mercer's position, tearing fabric and metal. Taking fire, Mercer called out. Copy, Hale replied, calm and controlled. The nose guns fired again. The second ship's deck gun was shredded before it could properly engage. Flames spread along the cargo area as the B-25 roared past at mast height. The third ship attempted to turn away, rudder hard over. It did not matter. The aircraft was too fast, too close. Mercer fired until his gun barrels glowed faintly. His hands ached from the vibration. He smelled burned cordite and oil inside the fuselage. Then they were past the formation, water rushing beneath them once more. Hale pushed the throttles even higher, hugging the surface as they accelerated away. For several seconds, no one spoke. Only when the ships began to recede behind them did Mercer allow himself to look back. One vessel was dead in the water, heavily damaged and burning. Another listed noticeably. The third trailed smoke and debris. They had been over the target for less than a minute. As they climbed slightly to clear the coastline, Mercer took stock. The aircraft had been hit, but nothing critical. Engines were stable. Controls responsive. The impossible aircraft had survived its first real test. Hale finally spoke again. That worked. There was no excitement in his voice. Only confirmation. They turned back toward base, flying low until they were safely inland. The jungle swallowed them again, hiding the sea and what they had left behind. When the B-25 touched down at Dobodura, mechanics and officers gathered immediately. They counted holes in the fuselage. They listened to the crew's report without interruption. Intelligence officers compared notes with reconnaissance flights that followed hours later. Smoke columns still rose from the coast. At least 2 ships were confirmed lost. A third was likely beyond repair. The numbers mattered. But what mattered more was what those numbers represented. For the first time in the campaign, Japanese coastal shipping had been decisively stopped. Not by altitude, not by doctrine, but by speed, surprise, and direct fire. Word spread quickly through the airfield. The aircraft that should not have worked had worked exactly as intended. And tomorrow, they would do it again. The third morning began without ceremony. There were no speeches, no congratulations. The airfield remained wet and crowded, the war pressing forward without pause. For Mercer and the rest of the crew, the success of the first mission brought no relief. It only meant that expectations had changed. Japanese shipping had been hit. Now it would respond. Mercer watched mechanics work through the night, patching holes in the fuselage, replacing damaged control cables, tightening mounts that had shifted under recoil. The nose guns were cleaned again and again. Ammunition belts were checked by hand, link by link. No one assumed anything would function the same way twice. Captain Hale studied reconnaissance photographs in silence. The enemy was adjusting. Ships were sailing closer together. Escort vessels were staying alert. Anti-aircraft guns were no longer unmanned. Their task had not changed. They were still to attack shipping along the coast. What had changed was the margin for error. There would be none. They took off just after dawn. The sky was clearer than the day before, visibility stretching for miles over the water. Mercer did not like that. Clear skies meant clear targets for both sides. As they approached the coastline, Hale brought the aircraft down again, lower than before. The B-25 skimmed the surface, engines running hard. The crew remained silent, each man locked into his role. Then the ships appeared. This time there were more of them. 4 cargo vessels and at least 1 escort, moving in a tighter formation than before. Deck guns were already manned. Lookouts scanned constantly. They had learned something, but not enough. The Japanese gunners spotted the aircraft almost immediately. Tracer fire began early, reaching out across the water in long arcs. The rounds passed close, striking the surface and skipping upward. "Stay on it," Hale said, his voice steady. Mercer watched the engine gauges as the aircraft absorbed vibration and stress. Every impact sounded loud at this altitude. He called out minor damage, nothing critical, as they closed the distance. The first pass was violent. The nose guns opened up, hammering the lead ship's bridge and forward deck. Gun crews disappeared under the fire. The escort vessel tried to swing its guns downward, but the angle was wrong and the timing worse. Mercer fired in controlled bursts, tracking movement on deck. A fuel fire erupted near the center of the ship, spreading fast. They passed so close that Mercer could see men abandoning their positions, some jumping overboard. The second pass came immediately after. Hale banked just enough to line up the next target, keeping altitude dangerously low. Tracer fire intensified. A heavy round struck the fuselage near the wing root, jolting the aircraft hard. "Left wing hit," Mercer reported. Still flying, Hale replied. The second ship took concentrated fire along its length. The sound of impacts changed as rounds struck metal hull instead of wood. Smoke poured from below deck. The vessel slowed rapidly, beginning to drift. By now, Japanese fire was heavy and organized. Shell bursts erupted ahead of the aircraft, forcing Hale to make minor corrections while maintaining speed. The B-25 was no longer a surprise. It was a threat. The third ship tried to break formation, turning toward the shore. It did not escape. Mercer felt the recoil of sustained fire through the turret. His hands were numb. The smell inside the aircraft was thick with smoke and heat. As they pulled away, the sea behind them was littered with debris. Two ships burned fiercely. A third was dead in the water. The escort vessel, damaged but still firing, remained afloat. They did not go back for another run. Hale pushed the aircraft low and fast, using the coastline for cover. The engine strained but held. On the return flight, Mercer counted the holes again. More than yesterday. The aircraft had absorbed punishment that should have crippled it. Back at Dobudura, intelligence confirmed the results. Additional ships destroyed. Others damaged badly enough to be written off. The total count continued to rise. But the losses were not one-sided. Another B-25 from a different crew failed to return. No parachutes had been seen. No radio calls received. The mood on the airfield changed. This was no longer an experiment. It was a pattern, and patterns attracted attention. Japanese commanders would not allow this to continue unchallenged. As Mercer cleaned his guns that night, he understood something clearly. The aircraft could do its job. The crews could do theirs. The question was how long either could survive what was coming next. The fourth day began with signs that the enemy was no longer reacting blindly. Overnight reconnaissance reports showed changes along the coast. Ships were moving closer to shore, using the cover of terrain. Escort vessels were positioned deliberately, not loosely. Anti-aircraft emplacements on small islands and headlands were now active during daylight hours. Japanese commanders had understood the threat. For Mercer and the crew, the briefing was shorter than ever. There was no discussion of whether the mission would proceed. Only how. Captain Hale traced a finger along the coastline on the map, marking narrow channels and shallow water. He chose approach routes that avoided obvious gun positions, even if they forced the aircraft lower and closer to land. "We go in once," he said. "We don't circle." Mercer checked the aircraft personally before takeoff. The nose gun mounts had been reinforced overnight. Ammunition loads were adjusted to reduce weight where possible. The B-25 was scarred now. Patchwork metal, mismatched paint, rivets standing out where repairs had been rushed. It looked like an aircraft that had already been in the war too long. They took off under a pale sky, the humidity already building. Hale kept the aircraft lower than on any previous mission, using the jungle canopy to mask their approach. The engines ran hot. Mercer watched the gauges constantly, ready to call an abort that he knew would not come. As they reached the coast, the first bursts of anti-aircraft fire rose immediately. Japanese gunners were ready this time. Tracers crossed their path from multiple angles, no longer hesitant or delayed. The ships appeared almost simultaneously with the fire. 5 vessels this time. Transports escorted closely by smaller armed ships. The formation hugged the shoreline, leaving little room to maneuver. Hale committed without pause. The aircraft surged forward, engines at maximum power. The nose guns opened first, tearing into the nearest escort vessel. Its forward gun position vanished under concentrated fire. The ship continued forward for several seconds before slowing abruptly, smoke pouring from its deck. Mercer tracked targets through the turret, firing short bursts to suppress gun crews. He felt impacts strike the aircraft in quick succession. The sound was constant now, metal tearing, fragments rattling through the fuselage. "Multiple hits," Mercer reported. "Still flying," Hale answered. They crossed directly over the first transport, firing into the bridge and cargo holds. Flames erupted along the deck, spreading faster than Mercer had seen before. The ship began to veer off course, colliding with another vessel in the formation. Japanese fire intensified. Shell bursts erupted ahead of the aircraft, forcing Hale to make split-second corrections while holding altitude. The B-25 shook violently, but stayed intact. The second transport was already turning away, its crew attempting to beach the ship. Hale lined up briefly and fired into the stern, disabling steering. The vessel drifted helplessly toward the shallows, burning. They pulled away at extreme speed, skimming the water so closely that spray struck the underside of the aircraft. Hale did not climb until the coastline had fallen behind them. Inside the aircraft, the silence returned slowly. Mercer checked systems again. One engine showed rising temperatures but remained stable. Control surfaces responded. The aircraft was damaged but alive. Back at base, the scale of the damage became clear. Multiple ships destroyed or disabled. Japanese coastal traffic in that sector had effectively stopped. Supply routes were disrupted faster than planners had predicted, but the cost was mounting. Another aircraft had returned with severe damage, barely landing. One more was missing entirely. The airfield felt different now. The crews understood that the tactic worked, but that it demanded payment every time it was used. That night, Mercer sat alone beside the aircraft, running a hand along patched metal and scorched paint. He did not think about doctrine or innovation. He thought about how close they flew to the water, how little separated survival from failure. Tomorrow would decide whether this was a breakthrough or a dead end written in wreckage. The fifth morning broke clear and bright, the kind of weather pilots usually welcomed. For Mercer, it brought no comfort. Clear skies meant the enemy could see everything. Japanese shipping had not stopped entirely. It had consolidated. Reconnaissance photographs taken before dawn showed a larger convoy moving through a narrow coastal passage. Several transports, tightly grouped, escorted by armed vessels. The routes suggested urgency. Supplies had to move, regardless of losses. This was the kind of target the modified B-25 had been created to destroy. Captain Hale studied the images carefully. He said nothing for a long moment, then folded the photographs and stood. "We'll get one pass," he said. "Maybe two if we're lucky." Mercer understood what that meant. The convoy would be alert. Every gun would be manned. There would be no hesitation, no confusion. Before takeoff, Mercer checked each system personally. Ammunition loads were full. Fuel was carefully balanced. The engines showed signs of wear, but still within limits. The aircraft carried scars from previous missions that no repair could completely erase. When they lifted off, the B-25 felt heavy but steady. Hale flew lower than ever, staying below the horizon line as long as possible. The crew remained silent, focused, aware that this mission would not forgive mistakes. As they reached the coastal passage, anti-aircraft fire began almost immediately. Tracer rounds reached out across the water, dense and accurate. Shell bursts erupted ahead of the aircraft, forcing Hale to weave slightly without gaining altitude. Mercer called out impacts as they struck, none critical, but too close for comfort. Then the convoy appeared. 6 ships, close together, their decks bristling with guns. Smoke from funnels drifted into the air, partially obscuring their outlines. The escort vessels were positioned forward and aft, their weapons already firing. Hale did not slow. The nose guns opened at maximum range, walking fire across the lead transport's bridge. The response was immediate. A wall of tracer fire surged toward the aircraft, passing close enough to be felt rather than seen. Mercer fired continuously, suppressing gun positions as the aircraft closed the distance. The recoil hammered through the fuselage. The smell of cordite filled the cockpit. The first ship erupted into flames near midships. Secondary explosions followed, rapid and violent. The vessel began to slow, then stopped entirely, smoke pouring skyward. Hale shifted slightly and lined up on the second transport. The B-25 flew directly through a curtain of fire. A heavy impact struck the aircraft, jolting it sharply to one side. "Engine 2 hit," Mercer reported, his voice tight. "Hold together," Hale replied. The nose guns tore into the second ship's deck and stern. Flames spread quickly. The ship listed hard to starboard, its speed bleeding away. By now, the escort vessels were fully engaged. Their fire was accurate and sustained. Hale knew they could not remain. He pushed the aircraft even lower, skimming the surface as they pulled away. Spray hit the underside of the fuselage. Mercer watched the damaged engine, ready to shut it down if necessary. They escaped the immediate kill zone and climbed slightly behind a line of low hills. Only then did the firing stop. Inside the aircraft, the damage assessment began. One engine was damaged but operational. Control cables were scarred. Several holes had torn through the fuselage. They had survived. Reconnaissance confirmed the results later that day. 2 transports sunk outright. Another heavily damaged and abandoned. Additional vessels damaged by other aircraft in the formation. The total count now stood at 11 ships destroyed in just a few days. But the cost was undeniable. Another crew failed to return. No sightings. No radio contact. That evening, the airfield was quiet. No one celebrated. The crews understood they were pushing a tactic to its limits, extracting results at a pace the enemy could not match, but a price that could not be ignored. As Mercer sat beneath the wing, cleaning guns and fading light, he knew the next mission would decide whether this aircraft would be remembered as a turning point or as a brief, violent experiment that burned itself out. One more day remained. The 6th day began with an uneasy calm. The airfield was quiet in a way Mercer had learned to distrust. No arguments, no hurried voices, no sense of urgency beyond the routine. The men moved efficiently, almost mechanically, as if slowing down might allow the weight of the previous days to settle in. The numbers were clear now. 11 Japanese ships destroyed in less than a week. Entire supply routes disrupted. Ground commanders reported shortages almost immediately. The tactic had worked beyond expectations, which meant it could not be allowed to continue unchanged. Reconnaissance reported one final movement along the coast. A small but important group of vessels attempting to slip through at first light. Japanese commanders were gambling that daylight and heavy escort would deter further attacks. They were wrong. Captain Hale gathered the crew beside the aircraft. There was no formal briefing, only confirmation of what everyone already understood. This would be another low-level strike. One pass, no deviation. Mercer checked the aircraft with unusual care. The engines were worn. The airframe carried more repairs than original metal in some sections. The nose guns, however, were clean and ready. They had become the heart of the aircraft. When they took off, the B-25 responded sluggishly at first, then settled into its familiar rhythm. Hale kept the altitude low, following the coastline with practiced precision. The jungle passed beneath them, dense and unbroken. The ships appeared suddenly, closer to shore than any they had attacked before. For vessels, smaller than previous convoys, but tightly escorted. Anti-aircraft fire began almost immediately, accurate and intense. Hale did not hesitate. The aircraft surged forward, engines pushed hard. Tracer fire streaked past the cockpit in dense lines. Mercer felt multiple impacts in quick succession, each one a reminder of how little separated them from failure. The nose guns opened at close range. The first ship's bridge disappeared under sustained fire. The vessel slowed sharply, smoke pouring from its superstructure. Mercer shifted targets, firing into the second ship's deck. Fuel ignited. Flames spread rapidly along the hull. Japanese sailors abandoned positions, some jumping overboard. The escort vessels responded with everything they had. Shell bursts erupted directly ahead of the aircraft. Hale made split-second corrections, holding altitude just above the water while maintaining speed. A heavy impact struck the fuselage, knocking Mercer sideways against his harness. Structural hit, Mercer reported. Still controllable, Hale replied. They passed through the formation at extreme speed and pulled away low, using the shoreline to mask their escape. The engine strained but held. Only when the coastline fell behind them did Hale allow the aircraft to climb. Inside the cockpit, the damage assessment was quick and grim. One control surface was partially damaged. Fuel was leaking slowly. The aircraft was flying on borrowed time. They returned to Dobudura without further incident, landing heavily on the soaked runway. Intelligence confirmed the results within hours. One more ship sunk, several damaged beyond use. The final count was undeniable. 12 Japanese ships destroyed in just a few days. The modified B-25 was no longer an experiment. It was a proven weapon. In the weeks that followed, the concept spread. More aircraft were modified. Tactics were refined. Low-level strafing and skip bombing became standard practice across the Pacific. Japanese coastal shipping never fully recovered. For Mercer, the memory of those days remained sharp long after the war ended. Not because of the numbers, but because of how close everything had come to failure. The aircraft had been called impossible because it challenged accepted limits. What proved otherwise was not just engineering, but the willingness of crews to step beyond doctrine when doctrine no longer worked. In the end, the B-25 did not change the war by itself. People did. Men who flew low when they were told to stay high. Men who trusted preparation over fear. Men who accepted risk because there was no alternative. That was how the impossible became history.